It's good Ed Brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with the Hometown Commander, and we are back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the Commander in front of us on my quest to out-brew your favorite Magic channel. We're continuing our Doctor Who content today. We're moving on to the Masters of Evil Precon, and I wanted to start with another deck from the Shuffle Up and Play episode we talked about during our first week with the War Doctor, and talk about the Master Multiplied. As always, if you're interested in the deck list, it will be down in the description for you, but let's take a look at the Master Multiplied. A 6-mana Time Lord Rogue 4/3 that has Myriad, so whenever it attacks an opponent, for each other opponent, we get a token copy of it that comes in tapped and attacking. It says the legend rule doesn't apply to creature tokens you control. So normally when you attack with Myriad with a legendary creature, of course it makes legendary copies and you have to choose one to keep. And then the third part of this says triggered abilities you control can't cause you to sacrifice or exile creature tokens you control. And this is exactly what we're going to build into the deck. First, Myriad makes you get rid of those tokens at the end of combat. That actually isn't going to happen because of his own ability. But two, we're going to try to put in as many effects as we can that let us not have to get rid of those tokens and keep them around to do shenanigans with them. Like I said before, a version in this deck was played on Shuffle Up and Play, which is where I got the idea for the deck, but I basically completely rebuilt it myself. There were cards that, of course, that were not in that person's deck list that I was like, oh, these cards make a lot of sense to me, and so I changed the deck to my liking. Of course, the deck is going to look a little bit similar because we're running the same commander and doing the same strategy, but I wanted to try to build this myself and maybe use some of the cards that I enjoy. The one cool thing is that, of course, the Masters of Evil Precon gave us a bunch of reprints of some really cool lands, so we've got a bunch of them here, and we are using things like Shizo to make something in as unblockable as possible, Sulphur Springs, and Graven Cairn, some example of red-black lands that aren't in the deck but are still very good to play. Takanuma for a little bit of mill if that's something we want to do for some of our abilities, but just trying our best. Command Beacon can be pretty helpful in a deck like this where your commander gets expensive enough, because then if it gets up to 8 or 10 mana, we can just put it into our hand and cast it for 6 instead of 8 or 10, if that's something we want to do. And we have something like War Room as well for a little bit of draw. Getting into the enchantments, and this is where part of our strategy is going to come out. Terminate Iteration says at the beginning of combat on your turn, populate. The token created this way has haste, sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. Well, of course, with the Master out, we're not going to sacrifice it. We're just going to keep that token. So every turn, hopefully at start combat, we're making a token copy of a token we control. One of my favorite cards that sees play in a couple of my other decks and feels great here is Elemental Mastery. Enchanted creature has tap, create X/1/1 tokens, elemental creature tokens where X is this creature's power. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. So again, we get the 1/1s and we get to keep the 1/1s and build up 1/1s every turn. Probably going to be one of the most expensive cards in the deck, but it's great for a couple reasons. This Fable and the Mirror Breaker. On the front side, we get that 2/2 that makes a treasure whenever it attacks. We can discard up to 2 and draw that many, but on the back side, it turns into a copy of Kiki-Jiki. I can tap to copy a token, make token copy of another target creature we control, and it says sacrifice it at the end step, but of course with the Master out, we won't. It does have to be non-legendary, the creature that we're copying, but we have lots of fun ones in the deck, and so I like it. We could just as easily run Kiki-Jiki, which we're not. I just like Fable because it has a bunch of value on the front side, and then you get to it on the back side. Flame Shadow Conjuring is a card I have a lot of love for. It says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you could pay a red mana. If we do, we make a copy of it. That token gains haste, and that gets exiled at the end step. Again, not here. This just allows us to get a second copy of anything we have. Now, when the Master's out, the legendary rule doesn't apply to tokens we control. But of course, as soon as the Master goes away, we will still have to, use the legendary rules. We have to be a teeny bit careful with these types of abilities because someone could just nuke our commander and stop our whole board. But I want to try to find these effects that would help us kind of gain advantage as we go. Impact Tremors, since we're making a lot of tokens off of things and using this Myriad ability to make things in combat, I thought, why not just get a little bit of chip damage into our opponents as we go? And I think Impact Tremors does a good job at that. Mirror March is a really fun card. Not just because it's absolutely hilarious, but because it fits right into our strategy. It says, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, we flip a coin until we lose a flip. For each flip you win, we make a token copy of that creature. It gains haste, and we exile at the beginning of the next end step. You won't probably win more than a couple flips, but at least you're still getting extra copies of that thing, and then we don't have to sacrifice them because of the master. Rising of the Day to give everything haste and give our creatures a little bit of a buff. It just makes sense as we're copying these things. We want to make sure they have haste. Shared Animosity, since we're going to be attacking with multiple copies of things, we can get a little bit of buff with Shared Animosity. To note with Shared Animosity, it is an attack trigger, so once the myriads go off, it's not going to count for Shared Animosity. Shared Animosity we adjust the creatures we declare the attack with, but again, over turns we're going to be building up this board, and I think it's still going to become worth it. Sound of Drums says we can go to creature, and then if that creature would deal combat damage to a player or permanent, it deals double that damage instead, and we can get it back. This is in here mainly solely for the flavor. This is a recurring theme with the master in the show, and it just feels good to have a card to goad our opponent's creatures, try to stop them from attacking us so we can hit them back. And then Warstorm Surge just felt right. We're putting in copies of creatures that are coming in. We're not trying to, again, ping people for that damage as we continue to go about making these tokens and getting these new things in, and then that way we're doing incremental damage again along the way to hurt our opponents. Getting up into the artifacts, there's a ton of fun stuff here. Of course, we're playing our Arcane Signet, but a card that makes a lot of sense in this deck is Blade of Selves. It said a quick creature has Myriad, so we get to put this on any creature we want to and give it Myriad, and there can be some fun effects we go for with that. But again, we could put our commander, which should have Myriad twice. We put it on a number of other creatures. I like Blade of Selves, and it makes a ton of sense in this deck. The Commander Sphere, of course, we need some mana rocks to help us out with mana. Since we're in red and black, all we have access to is mana rocks and draw, but we can sack it to draw a card, which is great. Cursed Mirror comes in as a copy of anything until end of turn, except it has haste. Anything we control. Oh, anything on a bad file. Sorry, I thought it was just something we control. And then eventually it becomes a mana rock. I like Cursed Mirror. It's a fun card. And it'll help us out with copying things and getting extra effects. Dolmen Gate, just to protect our creatures that are attacking. It'll help us not lose our Myriad tokens that we get to keep around, because obviously our opponents can still block them and destroy them in combat. Why not try to keep them alive? Falwar Stone for some mana. Laser Screwdriver, which is the Master's Screwdriver, fits really well in the deck. 3 mana rock that can pay 1 to tap an artifact, pay 2 to surveil, or pay 3 to goad a creature. I like the goad effect because it can try to point a creature not our way, maybe, if need be. And we can do it before our opponent hits combat, so if they put all their plans into something as they go to combat, we could potentially goad their creature and kind of screw up their plans. Lightning Greaves to help the Master get haste and be able to use his ability right away. Mind Stone for a little bit of ramp and a little bit of draw. Mirror Box, we don't want to just rely on the Master being out to stop our tokens from getting allowed to be stayed with the legendary rule, so we want to play the Mirror Box to also help with legendary rule. But the other thing we like is legendary creature, each legendary creature you own gets +1/+1, and then each of them get +1/+1 for each creature you control with the same name as that creature. So every time we Myriad with a Mirror Box out, it's just going to start getting harder and harder hitting to our opponents. Rakdos Signet, Soul Ring, Stronic Resonator can copy a triggered ability. So this can copy Myriad, this can copy a lot of other things as well, but it's just a very good card, and 2 mana to do it can be very important depending on what we're playing. Talisman of Indulgence. And then Urbrask Forge was one of the first cards I had thought about, because every turn you put a counter on it, make X one token, where X is the number of counters on it, and then you get rid of it at the end step. Well, we get to keep those, so we're just building a board of progressively larger and larger creatures. Getting into the spells, as far as the instants go, we're playing a little bit of removal. Bedevil can hit artifact creatures or planeswalkers. Chaos Warp hits anything, you shuffle it back in, and that opponent reveals the top card. If it's a permanent, they put it on the battlefield. Infernal Grasp hits any creature, and Terminate hits any creature. We want some creature removal there. As far as draw goes, we have Big Score. Discard a card, draw 2 cards, make 2 treasures. Dark Ritual for a little bit of mana, help us get the Master out quicker, potentially, if we see it in the early game. And then we have 2 pieces of sacrifice and draw. Since we're going to have those tokens laying around, why not use them to draw? Deadly Dispute, we could sack either an artifact or a creature. Same thing, but with Nasty End, it's just a creature. Deadly Dispute, two cards and a treasure. Nasty End is 2 cards, but if it's the creature's legendary, we get 3 cards. And hey, if we Myriad our commander, the Myriad tokens will be legendary, and so Nasty End can draw us 3 cards that way. Into the spells, Blasphemy Sack for a little bit of removal. We have to have some sort of board wipe removal. We can't trust that we'll always be on the cutting edge and ahead of our opponents. We need to have a way to stop them. Feed the Swarm can hit enchantments as well as creatures. So we do have the Bedevil for artifacts, the Feed the Swarm for enchantments, and then the Chaos Warp, which can hit anything. So we are kind of diversifying our removal. Hate Mirage, as we choose up to 2 creatures we don't control. For each of them, we create a token that's a copy of it. Those tokens gain haste, and we exile the beginning of the next end step. But again, with the Master out, we wouldn't, and we would get to keep those copies. Jessica's Will, either for the mana or for the impulse card draw. I think more or less it's for the mana. We could potentially add enough black, red mana and get a black mana to cast the Master or cast a bunch of spells. The important thing when we're dealing with Myriad is that we need combats to do it. So we're putting in Relentless Assault and Seize the Day to get extra combats so that we can get more Myriad triggers. Now the problem with Relentless Assault and Seize the Day is because those Myriad tokens don't have haste, they won't be able to attack normally once they're untapped. That's where we're hoping for something like a Rising of the Day, to make those. Now, if we get them off something like Mirror March or this Mastery, they already or the Determined Iteration, they already have haste, so we won't have to worry about that. But a normal Myriad token won't. So we kind of got to keep that in the back of our minds when we're playing with these extra combat spells, that we remember that. Toxic Deluge for some more removal, and then Twin Flame. It says we can cast pay 2 in a red to cast for each more target beyond the first. It says choose any number of target creatures we control. For each of them, create a token that's copy of that creature, except it has haste and exile in the beginning. So again, 2 mana just gets 1, 5 mana gets 2, and so on and so on. Copy the things we want, get more triggers, hit even harder. Again, I like a spell like this because it's going to take advantage of what we already have. For getting the creatures, we're playing just 1 Planeswalker, and I was surprised this one wasn't in this person's deck that played on the game. I guess it's probably because a lot of people don't play Planeswalkers in Commander, but I thought this one made a ton of sense. Chandra Acolyte of Flame, 3 mana, 0, make you 2 1/1s. They get sacrificed at the beginning of the end step. We can just then bank those 2 1/1s every turn. And then our -2 says we can cast target instant or sorcery with converted mana cost 3 or less from our graveyard. If he'd be put in the graveyard this way, exile instead, so we could recast a piece of our removal. I thought this just made sense. The 0 gives us 2 1/1s, and then the -2 lets us recast removal. It's doing one of the things we already want it to do and helping us out with value. I was just kind of surprised. I mean, there's other wings we could play. We could play something like the Planeswalker that also almost made it was Zerial from AFR, giving all of our creatures haste, and that would make sense. It would work with these extra combat spells. But I was like, Chandra makes sense. It's not a bad investment on its own. And then the 0 can also just +1 it, if we need to. It says put a loyalty counter every red Planeswalker you control, which will just put 1 on itself. So it can go up if we needed to. But really, 2 1/1s every turn. The extra copy of removal or draw. I think it fits the deck really well. And so I wanted to go with it. Well, all of our creatures in our deck kind of play a couple different roles. We have some creatures that are going to have Myriad, some creatures that are going to make copies of other things, and some creatures that are just going to have general benefit in our deck. And we're going to walk through them one by one. Dalek Drone, which came in the deck, Flying and Menace. So, that's pretty great. And this is whenever it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature and opponent controls, that player loses 3 life. So this is a great target for something like Blade of Selves, because we're just going to put it on this. It gets Myriad, and we get 2 copies of it if we're playing with a full pod. And then we get to destroy creatures with it when it comes in. This is also a great thing for things that we can make copies of, like for some of our creatures and some of our spells that make copies of other creatures. Now we're getting extra destruction spells off the Dalek Drone. Dalek Squadron has Menace and Myriad. So again, it's a great 3/3 with Menace that's going to have Myriad attacking all of our opponents at the same time and getting in for great value. Delina, one of my absolute favorite red cards that's been printed in the last 2 years, and a card that I want to build at some point in Commander, but I think is a really fun card. It says whenever it attacks, we choose a target creature we control, then roll a d20. On a 1 to 14, we create a tapped and attacking creature, copy of that creature, except it's not legendary, and it has exile at the beginning of combat. And then 15 through 20, we do it in but roll again. The cool part of this is we're not going to lose them because of the Master. And if we pick something like this, we're getting value when it comes in, over and over again, and it's still attacking. I really like Delina, and again, I think she fixed exactly what we're trying to do. Alternal Survivors has Trample and Myriad, and it gets, as long as it's attacking, it's plus X plus O, where X is the number of lands defending player controls. So this is a good one that could punish decks that are getting a lot higher up on lands than us. Probably not as good in some other decks that maybe don't have as many lands. But again, it's a trampling attacker, and the more lands someone has, the better it is, and it has Myriad. So we're already going to keep those copies around with the Master out. Filled in the third path is kind of, besides Delina, this is one of our kind of like 4 core creatures that copies other creatures. So Felden says, 2 in a red, tap, create a token that's a copy of target creature in your graveyard. Except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste, sack it at the next end step. So this is cool because the card doesn't leave your graveyard. Felden just says, hey, I'm copying this, makes us a copy, and that card stays in our graveyard. And that's important because we can also seed our graveyard. We could put something there if need be, right? If something dies, we know that we have Felden to keep getting us copies of it. For Void Flutist, it's kind of interesting. It says, when it enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature you don't control until end of turn. Untap it, it gains haste and Myriad. And that's cool because then that creature is going to attack. We're going to get the copies of that creature, but with the Master out, we're going to keep those copies instead of sacrificing them. So this is kind of cool because we can kind of choose what we want from it. Ganassi Enforcers, Myriad, and has 1 in a red. Creatures you own named Ganassi Enforcers get +1/+0 until end of turn. So if we have a bunch of extra mana, we can pump it into it. But hey, it's a Myriad creature. We keep the copies with the Master out, and then maybe eventually that +1/+0 actually becomes a good ability when we have 6, 9, or 12 of them, depending on how many turns we stack them up. Jax is another one of our copiers. Pay a red and tap it and discard a card to create a token that's a copy of another target creature we control. It gets haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card. When we sack it at the beginning of the next end step, we can do this only as a sorcery. Of course, with the Master out, it will stick around. But what I like about Jaxus is we can, even if the Master's not out, we can still get that card when it dies, and it might still be worth the red mana. Then we seed it into the graveyard for Felden to the Path, going that way. Carter just made a ton of sense. We're going to kind of always be attacking. We probably want to stop our opponents from just always swinging back at us. So Carter's going to help us with that. It says, when it enters the battlefield until your next turn, creatures your opponent control attack each combat if able and attack a player other than you if able. It says, whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So Carter's great because it's going to go to everything on the battlefield. Now, having Carter out with Jaxus or Delina or a creature we'll talk about in a little bit, we would allow us to keep goading our opponent's creatures, making sure they can't attack us and help us knock down everybody at the same time and make sure that we're not getting swung back on. Because I expect that to be the hardest problem with this deck is we're going to start putting damage on the board, but the problem is how are we going to be able to reconcile with people hitting back at us because we're hitting at them. Karlach, another one of our extra combat creatures, says whenever you attack, if it's the first combat this turn, untap all attacking creatures. They gain first strike until end of turn. After this phase, there's an additional combat. So this is fun because they gain that first strike until end of turn, and it's going to make them even better in combat. And then we get that extra combat to allow all of our Myriad tokens to get created again, all those abilities to happen again. Lagomos Hand of Hatred says at the beginning of combat, we make a 2/1 elemental with trample and haste, and we sack it at the end of the beginning of the next end step. So, of course, with the Master, I won't do that. But Lagomos has another interesting ability. It says, search your library for a card. So search your library, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Do it only if 5 or more creatures died this turn. This is kind of an interesting ability because let's say the Master gets removed, and a bunch of or let's say Lagomos is out and a bunch of these Myriad tokens, right? They attack our opponents and get killed in combat. Well, we could potentially just get a free search off of Lagomos with it. So what I kind of like is that Lagomos plays a dual role. It gives us the token for the Master, right, that sticks around, but also could help us search for cards that we need. Mirkwood Bats just felt right. We're making a ton of these Myriad tokens. We're making all these way to make tokens. Why not have each opponent lose a life every time we do it? And we can make copies of Mirkwood Bats with Myriad and all that, so it happens more and more. Again, it just feels right for the deck that we're making all these tokens. Why not lose some life off of it? Mishra here is more of a personal card than it is probably the best for the strategy. But my thought process is if our army is kind of growing and growing every turn, something like Mishra is just going to help us get there faster. It says whenever you attack, each opponent loses X life and we gain X life, where X is the number of attacking creatures. So again, that's on attack. This is before all our Myriad stuff and that goes off. But again, if we're swinging with 5 creatures, everyone's losing 5 and we're gaining 5, and then we're getting all of our Myriad and all of our other abilities. And you could see over a process of 1 or 2 turns with Mishra, we're probably just going to start hurting our opponents more and more than they can handle. And then we're not as worried about the crackback. We can focus a little bit more on hitting down our opponents. And again, I just think Mishra feels really great for that. He also really factors into these multiple combats because then we're getting 2 attacks per turn and 2 of his triggers per turn. So again, the card just feels great, and it feels right in the 99. Well, we already talked about one way to give extra combats. Let's talk about another way in Mirag, Fury of Akum. It's not a cheap creature, it's 6 mana, but Mirag can help you end games. Each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it attacked this turn, so each time it's declared an attack. It says, whenever a land enters battlefield under your control, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat after this phase. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. So, with Mirag out, you wait till your second main phase to play your land. You go through your first combat, play your land, second main, get an extra combat, and then those creatures should potentially have +1/+0 already. And then if so, then they get +2/+0 off that second attack, right? Total. If not, they're going to get another +1/+0, and it's just going to help with getting more damage in, getting more triggers in. And Mirag itself is a 6/6. It's already a hard enough creature to contain on its own. But again, it just helps these other creatures we have hit even harder. Well, one of our other copiers is Ortheon, Hero of Lovebringer. 4 mana, 3/3. This is for 1 in a red. We create a token that's a copy of another creature we control. It gains haste, sack at the beginning of the end step. So this is a good ability because it can hit any creature, so we can even hit our legendary creatures, which is where the Master's ability is going to come in handy for us. But for 9 mana, we create 5 tokens that are copies of that, that creature. They gain haste and sack at the beginning of the next end step. So again, for just 2 mana, we get 1 copy. For 9 mana, if we have the right creature, we can go all out and make 5. I think Ortheon's a fun card. It doesn't have a bad body on itself, but its ability is what we really want. I think we want some good attackers, especially things that we want to put that Blade of Selves or copy with. And one of my favorites that I could think of off the top of my head was Portraiser. It says, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you untap each creature you control. After this combat, there's an additional combat. And it says Portraiser can't attack a player that's already attacked this turn. Well, the fun part about Portraiser is you give it Myriad, each of the Myriad tokens will be able to attack another opponent the next combat. Again, as long as we have haste. But that Portraiser, if it still is retaining Myriad, just attacks another opponent. We get another trigger of Myriad. And again, Portraiser can just start spreading damage around. And with Myriad and haste, we might even be able to go infinite, depending on how many of our Portraisers get through and just hitting our opponents and dealing damage. Perforos, God of the Forge. Not a bad body in itself on a 6/5 and indestructible, but its main ability that we care about is whenever another creature enters the battlefield under control, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. So this kind of works with that Impact Tremors style of effect where we're dealing damage to our opponents every time our creature comes in. Ravenous Chupacabra, when it comes in, we destroy a target creature and opponent controls. And again, this is just like Dalek Drone, a great target off of Delino or Ajaxus, where we can make a copy of this and destroy something, and it'll actually act as another piece of removal for us. Sad Robot himself, Solemn Simulacrum. When it comes in, we get a basic land. When it dies, we draw a card. This, again, is another great target to make a copy of it, get its ability. And then if we have to sacrifice it, we don't mind because we get a card off it on the back end. I wanted to try the other Master in here because it seems kind of interesting, and I think his ability works really well with the Master we're playing. It says, whenever a non-token artifact creature you control dies, you may exile it. If you do, you choose an opponent with the most life among your opponents. That player faces a villainous choice. They lose 4 life, or you create a token that's a copy of that card. The main reason this is in here is we do have a couple creatures, non-token creatures that are artifacts. We may end up finding that this ability just doesn't work the way we want it to. I'm now realizing that we may not have as many artifact creatures as I thought we did. But again, we do have a couple half-decent ones. We could see, if not, this comes out and we slot something else in. Urabrask the Hidden seems like a fun one, giving all of our creatures haste, making all our opponents' creatures come in tap. This is going to help us when we're attacking, to make sure we can get more of our creatures in for damage. And then War Chief Giant having haste in Myriad, another just Myriad attacker that we can help attack with. But let me know, what do you guys think of Master Multiplied down in the comments. Again, I tried to take that list, make it my own. There's probably some cards I'm missing, some cards I'm probably overvaluing. But that's the fun of brewing, is we put these decks together and we would then go try them and see what works and what doesn't, make our changes, and keep going. But thank you guys so much for watching. The deck list is down in the description, and I will catch you guys next time.